webpage. Okay, now we will have reading number 580. The task of religious community. The central task of religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind us each to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. All right, now we will have the sermon. I'm going to talk about Elaine Pagels. She's the Harriet Spear Payne Professor of Religion at Princeton. She's best known for discovering the Gnostic Gospels, which have a new view of Christianity, unlike what we're used to. I was raised in the one holy, true Catholic Apostolic Church, and that idea was the Catholic Church is it. And if you don't believe in the Catholic Church, you will go to hell, or maybe limbo if you've never been exposed to it. So she has a much more inclusive view of religion. And I read her book. It's called Why Religion? And a lot of it is about her life. She married a man, a physicist, and then they adopted a child, and the child died at the age of 5. And then the next year, her husband died. He was at a gathering of physicists, and he fell off the mountain and just crashed because the rock gateway when he was hiking. So she had a lot to deal with. She had a strong background in religion before that, but it was a big experience for her. So the book intertwines the story of her life and deaths in her family, with her religious discoveries and career. So she talks about her life, and then she talks about religion. She started out, said there were few women in her religion programs at Harvard. She was the only one, plus one other one a year ahead of her. She was sexually assaulted by her advisor after babysitting his children. It was expected that she would do the babysitting, and he set himself up to be her advisor. And he did this year after year. But anyway, that she defines religion as a huge, messy heap of traditions, stories, images, and practices collected by people all over the world. So that is like she's saying it's tradition, it's practices, it's community and culture. And she has Bible, our texts written after the death of Jesus. None of them are neutral. And there was controversy among followers of these Gospels, which one was correct. And Paul, for example, never knew Jesus, so he just wrote about what people told him. And there were secret Gospels that were found much later in 1945. Different sects were fighting each other, and they said that some of these sects were heretics, and they were having wars. So people buried these texts in a 6-foot jar. They're called the Gospel of Truth, Thomas and Philip. She says religious leaders need to select elements from the tradition to fit the current situation. The elements that were suggested were a single male Israeli God, that was the creation story. But other religions in these Gospels had female gods as well. But it was based on the culture at the time. The work of culture is to make suffering bearable. Another thing she said, guilt is the price we pay for thinking we have control over our lives. So we really don't have control. We cannot find meaning in others, but we can create in others' deaths, but we can create meaning. Her long dead son, Mark, required them, what they got out of that was they should love other children. So they adopted another child. And after her husband died, she sat with monks in silence, with a large candle of the dead. They were like Trappist monks. She had constant images of her husband falling down the mountain, and she finally pictured him hitting the ground, and that stopped the images. But she was unable to do things for about 2 years. And while she was meditating with the monks, she felt waves of hope radiating over her. And this was the monks' prayers. Life means taking responsibility to find the right answers to problems that you're given and to fulfill tasks set for each individual. And we're not responsible for any of our misfortunes. God is not punishing us. So some people thought 9/11 was a result of sin and God was punishing our country, but that was not the case. And I have not done any kind of research like this in a long time. I'm pretty pragmatic, so I'm learning how to do it again at old age. But so I'm going to read some things that she wrote. The Gnostic Gospels, 52 texts discovered in Egypt, include secret gospels, poems, and myths attributing to Jesus sayings and beliefs which are very different from the New Testament. 30 years, the discoverer told us what happened. He and his brothers avenged their father's murder in a blood feud. They had saddled their camels and gone out to dig to the Jabal to dig for sabaka, a soft soil they used to fertilize their crops. Digging around a massive boulder, they hit a red earthenware jar, almost a meter high. Muhammad hesitated to break the jar, considering a jinn or spirit might live inside. But realizing that it might contain gold, he raised his mattock, smashed the jar, and discovered inside 13 papyrus books bound in leather. Returning to his home, Muhammad dumped the books and loose papyrus leaves on straw piled on the ground next to the oven. Muhammad's mother, Hamad, admits that she burned much of the papyrus in the oven, along with the straw she used to kindle the fire. Fearing that a few weeks, he and his brothers avenged their father's death by murdering Ahmed Ismail. Their mother warned their sons to keep their mattocks sharp when they learned their father's enemy was nearby. The brothers seized the opportunity, hacked off his limbs, ripped out his heart, and then devoured it among them as the ultimate act of blood revenge. Fearing the police investigating the murder would search his house and discover books, Muhammad Ali asked the priest to keep one or more for him. During the time that the brothers were being interrogated for murder, a local history teacher had seen one of the books, suspected it might have value. Receiving one, he sent it to his friend in Cairo. Sold on the black market through antiquities dealer, the manuscripts soon attracted the attention of officials of the Egyptian government. Through circumstances of high drama, they bought one and confiscated 10.5 of the leather-bound books and deposited them in the Coptic Museum. But a large part of the codes were smuggled out of Egypt and offered for sale in America. Word of this reached a distinguished professor in the Netherlands. Excited, he urged the Young Foundation to buy the codex. When he succeeded, but discovering that some pages were missing, he flew to Egypt to try to find them in the Coptic Museum. Arriving in Cairo, he went at once to the Coptic Museum, borrowed photographs of some of the text, and hurried back to his hotel. Tracing out the first line, he was startled and incredulous. These are the secret words the living Jesus spoke, in which his twin, Judas Thomas, wrote down. These are the opening lines of the Greek Gospel of Thomas, discovered in the 1890s. But discovering the text raised whole new questions. Did Jesus have a twin brother? Could this be an authentic record of Jesus's sayings? It contained the gospel according to Thomas, But unlike the Gospels of the New Text, it has identified itself as a secret gospel. He also discovered that many sayings known from the New Testament, but these sayings placed in unfamiliar contexts suggested other dimensions of meaning. Other passages differed entirely from known Christian traditions. The living Jesus speaks in sayings as cryptic, as compelling as Zen koans. Jesus said, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, do not bring forth, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So if you're true to yourself, if you are not true to yourself, it will destroy you. Other sayings in the collection criticize common Christian beliefs, such as the virgin birth or the bodily resurrection, as naive misunderstandings. Isn't that interesting? Because you always think, well, how did you have a virgin birth? Well, maybe the people were just naive and didn't understand. I would have gotten in a lot of trouble if I said that when I was young. Bound together with these Gospels is the secret book of John, which offered to reveal the mysteries and things hidden in silence. Some of the texts were lost, burned up, or thrown away, but what remains is astonishing. 52 texts from early centuries of the Christian era, including a collection of early Christian Gospels previously unknown. They included the Gospel of Truth, Gospel to the Egyptians, which identifies itself as the sacred book of the great invisible spirit. Another group of texts consider writing attributed to Jesus' followers. These diverse texts range from secret gospels, poems, quasi-philosophical descriptions of the origin of the universe, to myths, magic, and instructions for mystical practice. Why were these texts buried, and why have they remained virtually unknown for 2,000 years? Their suppression as banned documents and their burial on the cliff were both part of a struggle for the formation of early Christianity. The text and others like them were denounced as heresy by Orthodox Christians in the middle of the 2nd century. And here are some of the readings. Abandon the search for God and the creation of other matters of a similar sort. Look for him by taking yourself as the starting point. Learn who it is within you that makes everything his own and says, my God, my mind, my thought, my soul, my body. Learn the sources of sorrow, joy, love, hate. If you would carefully investigate these matters, you will find him in yourself. Sounds very Unitarian, doesn't it? Orthodox Jews and Christians insist that a chasm divides humanity from its creator. God is wholly other. But some of the Gnostics who wrote these Gospels contradict this. Self-knowledge is knowledge of God, and the self and the divine are identical. Second, the living Jesus of these texts speaks of illusion and enlightenment, not sin and repentance, like the Jesus of the New Testament. Instead of coming to save us from sin, Jesus comes as guide who opens access to spiritual understanding. But when the disciple attains enlightenment, Jesus no longer serves as a spiritual mentor. The two have become equal, even identical. Orthodox Christians believe that Jesus is Lord and the Son of God, and that is the Son of God in a unique way. He remains distinct from the rest of humanity who he came to save. Yes, the Gnostic Gospels relate that as soon as Thomas recognizes him, Jesus says to Thomas, they've both received their being from the same source. Jesus says, I am not your master. Because you have become drunk from the bubbling stream, which I have measured out. He who will drink from my mouth will because as I am, I myself shall become he, and all the things that are hidden will be revealed to them. So there are a lot of differences. It sounds more Eastern than Western. Some scholars have suggested if the names were changed, the living Buddha could say that the Gospel of Thomas attributes to the living Jesus. Could Hindu or Buddhist traditions have influenced Gnosticism? The British scholar of Buddhism suggests that it had. He points out that Buddhists were in contact with the Thomas Christians in South India. Trade routes between the Greco-Roman world and the Far East were opening up at the time when Gnosticism flourished. For generations, Buddhist missionaries had been proselytizing in Alexandria. We know too that Hippocrates, who was a Greek-speaking Christian in Rome, knew of the Indians' Brahmins and included their tradition among the sources of heresy. There is among the Indians a heresy of those who philosophize among the Brahmins, who live a self-sufficient life, abstaining from eating living creatures and all cooked food. They say that God is light, not the light one sees, not like the sun or fire, but to them God is discourse, that which finds expression in articulate sounds, but that of knowledge through which the sacred mysteries of nature are perceived by the wise. So perhaps they have an Indian tradition. So this is very different. If we admit that some of the 52 texts represent early forms of Christian teaching, we may have to recognize that early Christianity is far more diverse than anyone expected. So contemporary Christianity, diverse and complex as we find it, may show more unanimity than the Christian churches of the first and second centuries. For nearly all Christians at that time shared three basic premises. They accept the New Testament. Second, they confess the apostolic creed. And third, they have formed specific forms of churches. But every one of these canons of scripture, the creed, and the institutional structure emerged in its present form only towards the end of the second century. Before that time, as Irenaeus and others attest, numerous gospels circulated among Christian groups, ranging from those of the New Testament to such writings as Gospel of Thomas, Philip, the Gospel of Truth, as well as many other secret teachings attributed to Jesus. Some of these were discovered, others are lost to us. Those who identified themselves as Christian entertained many and radically different beliefs. By AD 200, the situation had changed. Christianity had become an institution headed by a three-rank hierarchy of bishops, priests, and deacons, who understood themselves to be the only guardians of the true faith. The majority of churches, among which the Church of Rome took a leading role, rejected all other viewpoints as heresy. Deploring the diversity of the earlier movement, insisted there could only be one church, and outside of that church, there is no salvation. Members of the church are Orthodox, and he claimed this church must be Catholic. Whoever challenged that consensus, arguing instead for other forms of Christian teaching, was declared to be a heretic and expelled. When the Orthodox gained military support, sometime after Constantine became Christian in the 4th century, the penalty for heresy escalated. So perhaps there was a different, better, more Unitarian church before we got our current structure of Christian churches. So I thought it was very interesting, and perhaps Bert or someone will give us another sermon on more about the Coptic text. But it's a different way of looking at history. So perhaps all those doubts we have sprang from history, and maybe they make some sense.